Shalom, and welcome to On the House, the podcast where you'll find everything you need to know about purchasing real estate in Israel. Hosted by Debbie Goldfisher, real estate consultant and founder and CEO of BuyItInIsrael.com. In each episode, Debbie sits down with leading industry experts to explore market trends, legal and tax issues, smart buying strategies, neighborhoods across Israel, and more. All this is On the House, helping you make the right move.
Welcome back to On the House. This season, we're not just talking about buying a home in Israel, we're talking about making Israel your home. Over the past few episodes, we've had some incredible conversations. We began with Rabbi Yehoshua Fass from Nefesh B'Nefesh, who spoke to us about the vital work the organization does, not just helping Olim make the move to Israel, but supporting them every step of the way once they arrive. At its core, Nefesh B'Nefesh is about empowering people to come to Israel by choice and helping them build strong, meaningful, and successful lives. Rabbi Fass also shared how Nefesh B'Nefesh is working quietly behind the scenes with government agencies and officials to tackle Israel's housing crisis, developing creative solutions for those who dream of living here but can't yet afford to buy. Then we spoke with Hillel Fuld, Israeli advocate, tech influencer, and one of the most passionate voices out there. Hillel shared his perspective on why every Jew belongs in Israel, how history and the script are so clear that the Jewish people can only thrive in their homeland, and how Aliyah today is more possible than ever. Last week, we had a powerful conversation with Rabbi Stephen Przansky, a retired American pulpit rabbi of 35 years who turned decades of leadership into personal action by making Aliyah. In a deeply moving episode, Rabbi Przansky explained that we are living through a pivotal moment in Jewish history, as Kibbutz Goliath, the ingathering of the exiles, unfolds before our eyes. He reflected on the spiritual and practical meaning of living in Eretz Yisrael and why for him Aliyah is not merely a lifestyle choice, but a leap of virtue for every Jew seeking purpose, connection, and destiny. And today, we are honored and excited to be joined by Rabbi Daniel Rowe, one of the most eloquent and thoughtful voices in the Jewish world today. Rabbi Rowe spent decades working with students and young professionals across Europe as the executive director of Aish UK. He's known for his rare ability to take complex topics, philosophy, halacha, hashkafa, and Jewish thought, and make them accessible, engaging, and deeply relevant to modern life. Rabbi Rowe is in the final stages of completing his PhD in mathematical philosophy at the University of London, and this past summer made Aliyah with his wife and family. He now serves as the executive rabbi and senior lecturer at Aish Global. As we talk about the journey of making Israel your home, I specifically wanted to bring Rabbi Rowe on because he really gets it. He's someone I look up to personally, intellectually, and spiritually. He spent years working with Jewish communities abroad, so he understands the pull and the challenges of life in the diaspora, and yet he ultimately chose to make the move. Earlier in his life, he served in the IDF, giving him a grounded, first-hand understanding of Israel beyond the classroom and religious work. It's this rare combination of deep Torah scholarship, real-world experience, and an honest awareness of both the opportunities and challenges of living in Israel that makes Rabbi Rowe uniquely suited for today's conversation. And to top it all off, we're sitting here today in the headquarters of Aish Torah, overlooking the Kotel from the old city of Jerusalem, the most amazing place on earth. So thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Rowe, for being here today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, we're going to dive into some of the biggest and perhaps most sensitive questions surrounding Aliyah. While last week's episode with Rabbi Przansky addressed the broader Jewish world across all backgrounds, today's conversation takes us deeper into the halachic and hashkafic questions that are particularly relevant to the Anglo-from yeshivish community, although the practical insights are valuable for anyone thinking seriously about Aliyah. So let's start at the root. Rabbi Rowe, is it a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael? Is there any halachic obligation to make Aliyah?
There is some machlokas about it. What I think everybody agrees is that it's an extremely good thing and really important thing. There's a question, I think Ramosha wrote a tshuva, Ramosha Feinstein, where he said it might only be D'Rabbanan nowadays. Most would say it's D'Oraisa. One thing is for sure, it doesn't even get into the technical question of which mitzvah one fulfills if they arrive in Eretz Yisrael. Everybody agrees. The Rambam famously doesn't list the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael in the 613 mitzvahs, but he writes halacha very, very clear that that living here is so important that you could ask a non-Jew to sign a contract to buy a house in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos.
Good to know.
Yeah, it has a practical ramification.
Obviously, that applies only when you're buying from a non-Jew.
Yeah, in other words, that's an Issa D'Rabbanan, asking a non-Jew to do a melacha for you on Shabbos. And you can, because Eretz Yisrael is so important. He quotes, Rambam doesn't generally quote Agadatas, right, non-halachic Gemaras in the Mishnah Torah. But he quotes explicitly the Gemara, the Talmud, that says that Kol Hadar b'chutz la'aretz, anyone who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael, afilu b'makom sheru b'Yisrael, even in a place that's majority Jewish, a nice Jewish town, is like he doesn't have his domain, like he doesn't have a god, basically. And whereas anyone who's dar b'Eretz Yisrael lives in Israel, afilu b'makom sheru b'akom, even if you're in a place the majority idol worshippers, has k'mishesh le'elokai, he has a very special relationship with Hashem. So there's no question that all things being equal, a Jew belongs in Eretz Yisrael. There's no question Hashem wants us to be here. No question that we should make every effort we can. But, people often ask me, well, okay, but you spent 20 years outside. I always wanted to be here. To me, it was an obvious thing that a Jew should aspire to be here. I was young enough to be able to make the move when we just got married. Also, helping the community is critical, crucial. So we felt that.
So we're going to come to your personal journey, okay. But I want to go back to
if you want to get back to the simple, straightforward, it is very, very clear. We say it in the Ramban says on the Torah that the mitzvahs outside of Eretz Yisrael don't have the same meaning. Mm-hmm. They're meaningful in as much as that one day our descendants, whether that's our genetic descendants, if we're able to have children and so on, or our conceptual descendants, if we teach people, one day our future will be here, and when they do mitzvahs here, it'll be like a tree that gave fruit. So some understand that means practice, and they attack the Ramban for that. But what a Ramban, I think, means is that it's like a tree. You're growing the tree, but the tree's only meaningful because one day it will produce fruit. Mm-hmm. And the fruit are when you can come to Eretz Yisrael and keep mitzvahs. Rashi says in Parshas Eikev as well, by the way, in v'haya im shema.
Beautiful.
Rashi actually says it, that you would think that you shouldn't even bother putting tefillin on in chutz la'aretz. Okay, but it will, because one day you're going to come back here. So it's very clear the purpose of all the effort that was made being outside Eretz Yisrael was so that one day Jews could come back here and keep mitzvahs that will retrospectively vindicate the tree that they were growing, but the fruit is only when you do the mitzvahs here. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely clear.
So if it's such a clear mitzvah, why aren't more people making Aliyah? And where are the rabbis when it comes to encouraging Aliyah?
One can't speak for everybody. I think in the big picture, the opportunity to make Aliyah has only really been since the 19th century. Mm-hmm. And in a big way, only been since the State of Israel. And so many Jews have made Aliyah, actually.
But so many have not.
So many have not. It takes time. It's not as simple as you click your fingers, get on a plane and go. Right?
It's not, but today Aliyah is a lot easier than it used to be.
It's a lot easier. Well, look at the numbers when the State of Israel started, right? It started with a tiny fraction of the world's Jewish population, 5% or something. Today, it's more or less 50%.
Absolutely.
So Aliyah is happening. Now, of course, a rabbi of a community and people in communities have to factor in things like if somebody makes Aliyah and there's an issue of their children, education, there's complications. But yeah, the justification for not being here is not as strong as it once was. Mm-hmm. The Gemara basically says there's three good reasons. You leave for it could be different if you're already here, leaving versus coming back. But in principle, you leave for marriage, for parnasa, and for mitzvahs. So today it's quite easy to do all of them here.
Right.
I remember when I was in yeshiva, so that's 30 years ago. And Israel was still technically, I think, a second world country, bordering a first world country. You didn't have air conditioning in all the houses. There were even parts of the country didn't have fully operating electricity the whole time. You had the Tel Aviv-Yerushalayim highway was one lane each side. So it was harder. Today, it's
phenomenal.
It's phenomenal. Yeah. But okay, look, a person's got teenage kids. It's not the easiest thing in the world. Mm-hmm. So to say we have to criticize everybody is not that. I would
not criticizing, but I'm trying to understand, why are people not aspiring to this? There are so many people out there that are so comfortable, and Israel's just not on the radar. It's not Aliyah. It's not a plan. There's no plan. There's no aspiration for it. Why?
It's very hard to get into the mind of everybody. I don't know whether one could be as critical. I actually suspect most people, a lot of people in the back of their mind do have a plan or an intention one day. Others have it, if their whole family, all their cousins and uncles and grandparents, they've grown up in a place. Most people don't think very differently to how they grew up in general, right? You could take this with lots of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs that people are strict about, mitzvahs people are not strict about. Very, very often depends on the community they grew up in. If in their community everyone was super machmir on something that's not really even a halacha, they'll do it as well. And if they're in a place where people are super makel on a d'oraisa, they'll also be. That's the nature of human beings. But I think a lot of people, I think it might be giving people less credit than is due. I think a lot of people have in the back of their mind that ideally they should be here, would love it if it were possible, would perhaps hope that the whole community would move together and they'd go with them. I think, look, it's very hard to read the Torah and not think we should be in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, the whole Torah is the journey to Eretz Yisrael. All the brachos and klalos ultimately are Eretz Yisrael will work brilliantly and the land will be fertile and productive and you'll be safe in Eretz Yisrael if you do the mitzvahs. And if you don't, the land will start going wrong and then you'll be kicked out. And then when you do tshuva, you'll be brought back in. I mean, it's not actually possible, I don't think, even a very uneducated Jew who holds anything to do with the Torah has to understand. I mean, everybody understands that this is, where do you turn to 3 times a day? What are you saying benching? What do you thank Hashem for? Right? You gave us a good land. That's not referring to where we live in Chutz La'aretz. So I don't think anybody who takes Yiddishkeit seriously doesn't have an aspiration to be in Eretz Yisrael. It just might be, in all things considered, they might consider it unrealistic for where they're at right now.
Okay, so on that point, I mean, I've heard a number of different reasons people don't come, and I genuinely want to understand. For example, if someone feels they are living a stronger halachic religious life outside of Eretz Yisrael, should that override the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael?
So again, it's so case specific because you're dealing with, in each case, they're fundamentals, they're like foundations to all mitzvahs, right? Eretz Yisrael on one level is a foundation to all mitzvahs because all mitzvahs really need to be done here. But leading a religious life is a foundation of all foundations. So, but
you can lead a religious
so now
life in
what
Israel.
You call less, what you call more. So I think so many of these things are very case specific. There is one major challenge in Eretz Yisrael. I want us to be very careful, actually, because if Chashal will say the negative, we might fall into the zone of the Meraglim. I actually have to tell you a great story before we get back on target here.
Please.
So when I took the kids here to see the place before we came, so on the way out in the airport, some guy was a bit pushy and nudged in front in the queue. So the kids were a bit bothered. So I said, look, that's how it happens here. It's different culture. And the guy turned around next to me goes, Chavali says that you spoke Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael.
Wow.
So the Parashat HaMeraglim, it happened to have been Parashat Shlach Lecha that week.
Wow.
I was like, he's right, actually. You can't actually say negative things. So that said, there is, it's not as bad as it used to be. There is in Chutz La'aretz, you don't have to define Haredi, modern Orthodox. And a lot of people can live in a kind of zone in between. They might, certain hashkafic things, they consider themselves a bit more, let's say in the YU world or something. But they want their Shemiras HaMitzvahs to be more like a Haredi Jew. And it's very easy to kind of straddle boundaries. They can have a university degree but be learning 6 hours a day, 5 hours a day. They don't have to land neatly in one camp or another. Here, you do, because of the army actually, amongst other things, but also the way communities are structured, you do have to a little bit come off the fence kind of thing and pick this side or this side, and that can create a discomfort. Actually not as much nowadays as 20 years ago, but that is a factor. Once upon a time you had to make a decision very quickly. You're in the Shiva Katana system and in the Hesde system. Which system are you in? So these can be factors for people. I think another is if a person is Haredi and their work as a balabais, they can feel if they come to Eretz Yisrael, they're looked as a second-class citizen. Because,
by the other Haredim.
Yeah, because here are people who are dedicating their lives to living without any serious income, 12 kids in a little cupboard.
On the other hand, by the non-Haredim, they're looked upon very respectfully.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm saying that I'm giving different points of different types of populations that might be bothered. But
that's not a reason not to come.
I didn't say it's a reason not to come. You're asking me to understand people. But the biggest quote-unquote reason people don't come is simply because you've got a life here established. Let's say I've got a career, I've got all my friends, all my family. I grew up here in Chutz La'aretz, right? It's very difficult to uproot and leave all that behind and go to the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
There might be financial consideration, like I don't know if I'll get a job so easily. So those are the sorts of factors. With all that said, should every Jew aspire and try to work towards having a plan? Yeah, I think it's a Dover Pasha. I think it's a simple, straightforward thing that a Jew should have an aspiration to get here, should be thinking about a way they could get here. Just like any other mitzvah, if you want to take it on, it's out of reach, or any other avodas Hashem, we should at least have a plan or an aspiration, for sure.
Okay. So if parents are concerned that making Aliyah could weaken their children's level of religious observance, if there's a real concern that the children might become less from, how should that factor into their decision?
Huge. Should be huge. At the same time, there's no guarantees anywhere. A lot depends on the age of the children. I think if a child's under 10 years old, under 9, 10 years old, it's probably a no-brainer that there are today, for a Chutz La'aretz person, there's plenty of schools at all levels of observance. A person should research properly, and that research includes speaking to lots of people, ideally speaking to people who've made Aliyah and gone to different schools. English, if they're English-speaking places. But there's parts of the country now where we are, for example, in Yerushalayim, there's quite a lot of schools where an enormous percentage of the parents' body is English-speaking, and kids speak English at home, which makes the transition and the culture much, much more manageable. And that's true nowadays, even for 11, 12, 13-year-olds. Again, it depends on the kid, but in principle. Obviously, the first 6 months to a year for any kid's transition could be difficult.
Sure.
But there's enough cultural affinity and enough similarity in the types of schools that it's less difficult. You're talking about 15, 16-year-olds, that could be a very difficult age still. You're ripping people away from their friends. They're in the middle of their big school exams. A person certainly should be considering their kids' religious thing, absolutely. That said, there's no guarantees in Chutz La'aretz. It's not like the rates of loss of Yiddishkeit in one or the other are particularly higher. People get afraid, oh my goodness, I heard so-and-so made Aliyah, one of the kids became less religious. And but I heard 30 other families that did, and all their kids are religious. And I heard, unfortunately, in Chutz La'aretz, some didn't either.
Right.
In general, I think good planning and good research, and also looking at who are the kids who come out of the schools, where do they go to afterwards, thinking a little bit ahead. And being willing in the first few months or year or so to ensure that whatever job we're in, could be both parents don't necessarily work for the first year, so there's time with the kids. I received some great advice, which is that once a month, take them out of school and just take them on a teal for the first 6 months they're here. And it's amazing. And thank Hashem, we've seen so much bracha, really so much bracha.
So beautiful. Okay, we're going to come to that in a moment.
Okay.
But you mentioned earlier, I forget which quote it was, that we're closest to Hashem in Eretz Yisrael. So if a child becomes less religious in Israel, they're living in Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to a child who remains very firm and learned in Chutz La'aretz, you're saying that they should stay in Chutz La'aretz?
Look, you might... Well, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a Rav who would say, or any halachic source that would say it's better to live in Eretz Yisrael and not keep the Torah. Of
course, and there's still a chance that the kid will remain religious, and there's a chance that they will not be religious in the Chutz La'aretz.
I don't know. I think that the responsibility as parents to keep the kids keeping Torah mitzvahs in their tightest, strongest relationship to Hashem does come first. But a part of that teaching kids should be teaching they should want to be in Eretz Yisrael.
Correct.
Right. In other words, yes, there may be a strong case that whilst we're raising kids in Chutz La'aretz, we have to stay in Chutz La'aretz for a little bit longer. Certainly if they've hit certain ages. That may be, again, it's very, very family by family, case by case dependent. But a part of any chinuch has to be a chinuch of Eretz Yisrael. Now, it is true, I think possibly because of some of the political dynamics of Zionism, non-Zionism, certainly when you get to the more Haredi world, sometimes Eretz Yisrael might be a little downplayed. Although I think even there, you can't, again, you dabbling towards Eretz Yisrael 3 times a day, you can't. You
can't get away with it.
Of course, that's what I'm saying. You have to have Amor outside because of the Churban in Eretz Yisrael. Everything's Eretz Yisrael. You can't move without Eretz Yisrael. But, okay, it could be a little less put into the education system that this should be a realistic aspiration. So fine, but like lots of things can't be emphasized all the time. Parents should be emphasizing that, and we should be, again, I believe most people probably do have some aspiration. Like I said, it would be very hard-pressed to be a frum Jew and not think we should be in Eretz Yisrael, an ideal, if we can make it work. So yeah, and that's something we have to also inculcate into our children. If we can't make it, or we're not at the stage of life, we certainly should aspire that they and our grandchildren will be here, Be'ez Hashem.
Love that. Beautiful. And if a family knows that they would have to significantly downsize their home or lower the standard of living, how seriously should these concerns be weighed halachically and hashkafically?
So if it's a simple calculation in theory of lowering one's income standards for any avodas Hashem, the answer, of course, we do it. We do it all the time. Mm-hmm. It will be a lot cheaper and we could live a lot better if we didn't keep kosher.
Or Shabbos.
Or Shabbos, right. We'll have to live in a from kela. We're always downsizing for the sake of Torah mitzvahs. That goes without saying. On the other hand, a person has to understand three things. Again, most important, will the children come to resent a downsizing? Will their spouse struggle and not be able to function with the downsizing? And will they come to resent it? And which is true of all growth in Yiddishkeit. If we grow too much and we stretch ourselves past the level we can sustain, then we always have to be careful. We have to make sure it's sustainable. Now, having said all of that, we have to also realize that today the gap between living in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz is much smaller. And what else is important is what you need in Eretz Yisrael is much less. Mm-hmm. You only fully realize this when you speak to people here. You realize it a bit. When you come and move here, you realize it incredibly.
What do you mean? Give examples.
So, in Chutz La'aretz, there's always a feeling, even if you're personally not into Gashmias, that you have to have the next thing because somebody else has it. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to explain if you're not actually left there. Mm-hmm. But it's a pressure and a stress on life the whole time, and you're constantly buying things because everyone else has them. It's just a part of living in a very materialistic culture.
I've forgotten all about it. Hasn't been
here. It just isn't there. I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all, but there's so little pressure, and you suddenly just feel this immense alleviation. You know, it's very easy to function with one car when there's good public transport in relatively small cities and it's nice weather to walk in, right? Or bikes. It's so easy. And suddenly I was, well, if you lived in a giant city like London or something, you know, maybe you did, but
you manage with less.
You manage. It's not. You don't even feel that you needed it. It's like, and because again, and also on a very genuine side, you don't want your kids to feel deprived. So if so and so's got the latest gadgets and the latest this and the latest that, your kid has to have them too. And if they're producing a wedding that costs a house, you have to do it for your kid too. And everything just costs because everyone else is doing it, because a part of your status depends on your ability to provide. Here it's just much significantly less. The typical Balabatisha community in Eretz Yisrael, whether you're talking Haredi or Dati or me, you'd have people learning 5 hours a day and very little aspiration to build, you know, the next wing of the house and the next Lexus. It is much less pressure for all that here. So the kids don't miss things to the same degree. They don't turn around and go, all my friends, because their friends don't have it. Meaning they're not deprived here. Like you come from Chutz La'aretz, you come here, and again, my kids, well, the toys they needed, we got them. All the things they need, they have. They got the camps, they got the football. On the contrary, here an average municipal event is a friendly event, often full of chevra from the neighborhood who are going together for municipally sponsored event. So you've got just thousands of activities for kids to be doing with from friends.
How amazing!
Which in Chutz La'aretz, you don't realize you just don't have that.
Absolutely,
you just don't have that.
So going back to the concern about pulling kids away because it's going to be so hard for them, they'll become resentful. In the end, they actually might thank you.
Oh, for sure. I think kids under a certain age will be very, very grateful to parents who moved to Eretz Yisrael. I think you see that all over.
Yeah.
If parents are miserable, then the kids will be miserable. If parents are happy, the kids will usually be happy. Again, there may be exceptions, but certainly if they're young kids, they can be happy very quickly here.
Amazing. So tell us about your journey. What made you and your family decide to make Aliyah this year?
The truth is, I've always wanted to be here. Simple as that. I'm a very close relationship. I have a zchus of having an amazing Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz, and I used to call him roughly once a year. I'm going to speak to him much more than once a year, but once a year roughly, or once every 2 years, I'd ask him, is my purpose really meant to be in Chutz La'aretz? And he'd say, yeah. Where, you're doing all this work and it's critical for the community, and keeping candidly connected to Hashem is absolutely essential. And you've got certain abilities to do that in Chutz La'aretz. You understand the culture, the language, the mentality, everything. You should be in Britain specifically, and that's what you should be doing. And I felt that was a very objective, Torah-based view, understanding me, understanding the situation, and it made sense. Truth is, I always knew that made sense. It was about a year and a bit ago. I was here for a simcha. My sister actually sat me down and was pushing me a lot on this. I should be nice, so she often did. But I did feel that perhaps things have changed. My place in life has changed. My age has changed. What I can achieve and accomplish. And also the digital world has changed. I was beginning to do more and more digitally, and that doesn't need to be in one place. My ability to run around on a university campus and hang out with 18-year-old kids was not quite the same. And various other factors. So I asked Rebecca, and he said, actually, where you're at right now in life, if the right thing comes up in Eretz Yisrael, I should take it very seriously.
Wow.
And at the time, I'd actually broken my leg, so I couldn't really travel much. But tremendous hashkafa Rabbi Steve Berg called me up more or less a week or two later and said, it happened where Aish is right now. We really have a job we'd love you to do. And, Rowe, Aish has got an amazing digital reach, and they now want to convert a lot of that, hopefully, into projects of big online learning, allowing so many Jews around the world to be connected, learning, growing from all backgrounds. And we need, as well as tech people, educational people, and so wow, that was amazing. Hashkafa.
Amazing.
I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't travel at the time, but he came to England, and yes, there was the whole October 7th, post October 7th going on, which actually, interestingly enough, I don't know if that was a pull to come or not. On the one hand, it was a huge pull to come, even despite all the danger. I mean, at the time it was still Hezbollah was still very active in the north, and but we didn't feel that's a reason not to come. It almost felt the fate of candidly, they're in trouble. You want to be there, but it was also that Chutz La'aretz is struggling, and so I looked around, but I could see Aish didn't need me at that stage. I mean, I'd served for 20 years, and I could see what I'd contribute, and I'd what still to contribute. But it's an amazing organization, tremendous young talent growing up there, a lot of great care being done. It really was a time I could move on, others could grow into those positions, and it just felt, this is right. So we said, yeah, we've got to sort the kids out, get the right schools, get the right place to live, all this kind of stuff. And it was just amazing. Hashkafa, one thing after another fell into place. It just felt like HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be here.
But that's very common. Once you make a decision, the rest falls into place.
Eretz Yisrael is a world of Hashkafa Hashem. It's in the Torah.
It's unbelievable, right?
This is the place of Hashkafa Pratis, and you can't not see it.
So true. And going back to working digitally and reaching, people around the world, so many people are working remotely now. They literally just need an internet connection and they can do their work.
Absolutely. Where we live, we're Shari Chesed, Shari Chesed Nachlot. I mean, the amount of people you meet are like, I just came here 6 months ago. I just came here, and they're doing the same job they were doing in America, doing in England, doing in Argentina, wherever. It is phenomenal. People can really
I think COVID contributed towards that.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah.
Would you say the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael is more relevant today than ever before?
The milas, let's call it milas of living Eretz Yisrael, because at some point you see it as a meta mitzvah. The spiritual reason to be here has always been here. The possibility of being here. The two things have changed. Well, a few things have changed. First of all, you see in the Rishonim, whoever could get here got here.
Yeah.
The Ramban tried and eventually got here. The Rambam tried and it didn't work. The Kuzari tried and died. Rabbi Daniel, etc. People tried all the time. After the expulsion from Spain, there was a huge effort, but the land didn't have the produce to sustain a population. So Tzfat became a strong Jewish community and so on, but people who tried, they couldn't, they starved. And travel in those days, it wasn't like you packed a bag and you had an airline meal and you came. You had to really worry, am I going to be able to eat food all the way through the journey? I'm not working, I won't have an income. I rely on people to feed me. And people died traveling. Mm-hmm. Travel was incredibly difficult, dangerous. So people couldn't. And it was only the 19th century when train travel and boats and telegrams even became feasible to support, and suddenly people started moving back from Europe. And then when the State of Israel happened, suddenly for the first time you had an authority that says, we want you here, not we're going to quota the numbers of you that can come in, and we'll support you to come here, and we'll support yeshivas for learning. It's a nice, however you look at it, but the last decades, the explosion of Jewish life and the explosion of Torah and the explosion of everything is beyond unbelievable. So now, it's certainly the easiest time in history, and you feel Klal Yisrael is here now. This is the biggest kehillah in the world for the first time since the Churban, and it's also about to become more than 50%, which means at that point we will say Rov Yisrael Shurim Ba'aretzam. You've got a situation for the first time since. And we're not even clear by Sheni if it was Rov Yisrael here, right? Mm-hmm. But let's say, since then, since that Golus, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can now say Klal Yisrael lives in Eretz Yisrael.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
Wow. I was going to say, as we look to the future, do you believe we're witnessing a gradual shift of the center of gravity of Jewish life from the diaspora to Israel?
The shift happened already a long time ago.
You've answered me.
Yeah, the last Gadol Adar, recognizable Gadol Adar, who was the undisputed Gadol who lived in Chutz La'aretz, was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. The dates shifted. It's all out. So that's Torah learning, culture, civilization. The days when everything was about how much can the diaspora support Israel. It still exists. It's still important, but it's much more now about Eretz Yisrael supporting the diaspora. Much more.
Isn't that incredible?
It's incredible. It's absolutely. But it's an absolutely incredible thing.
So, what do you think? Do you think there'll always be a role for Jewish communities in the diaspora, or is the ultimate goal for everybody to return home?
The ultimate will be everyone return home. Realistically, there's going to be a diaspora for the foreseeable future, unless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can change anything at any point. You feel he's often shaking the world up and moving things. He'll decide whether there is or isn't. But even if there is, that doesn't mean an individual should want to be in that situation.
Right.
It's like there's going to be roles for lots of people in lots of situations we don't want anyone to be in. There's going to be roles for mental health professionals, physical health professionals. We wish nobody needed them. There's going to be lots of roles for people in the diaspora for sure. But yes, of course, like I said, there's no question a Jew who can be in Eretz Yisrael should be in Eretz Yisrael.
So what about people who feel they have a mission to build communities, to educate, to inspire outside of Israel?
Also critical. When Jews are outside of Eretz Yisrael, like they are on huge numbers today, and there's a real need for spiritual guidance, growth, especially because most Jews today have very limited Jewish connection, there's an absolute need for people to be there who can do good there.
But sometimes I feel like those leaders are keeping their people there. If they came, they might be followed.
There might be communities like that here and there, right? It might be, I don't know, a small contained Jewry. And I believe this very strongly. The Jews who are less connected are not about to just get on planes and come because a rabbi comes with them. There's a huge need for support. There's a huge need for them to stay Jewish, to be growing Jewishly. And hopefully along those journeys, there'll also be many who will come here. But I think there's communal leaders do need to be there. Many, if you're really a Rav attached to a community, you might have to be the last one out, as it were. But again, each Rav needs to know what their community is whether this starts to shift to the priority push or not. And that may vary from place to place and community to community. In
your experience, how do young Jews in the UK or the US view Israel? As a spiritual homeland, as a backup plan, or something else?
I think all the above. Most people come here to learn yeshiva at some point, which means whether we're conscious or not, at some point we're recognizing it as our spiritual home.
Right.
The people want to come here on holiday. They want to go to the Kosel Maravi. People, they come here because this is the place of Judaism. This is the Jewish place. So, then depending on the kehillah they're in and where they go, do they relate to themselves as religious Zionists? They may feel another dimension of the affinity. They may relate to themselves as religious non-Zionists, in which case they'll feel a different affinity. But nobody doesn't feel that this is the place where the Avos were, where the Mishnah was written, where Tanakh took place, where we are meant to come back to. And so everybody understands that, and that's why everybody feels. I think everybody, again, consciously or subconsciously, completely relates to that. Everyone understood, in general, and we feel it's not just a halachic concept. Everybody feels when a Jew is under attack, we're all under attack. But everybody feels when the state of Israel is under attack, we're being attacked. Now, again, there can be a complexity that if you're in the religious anti-Zionist camp, you may feel the state is a terrible thing. But the yishuv of Jews in Eretz Yisrael, there's no controversy over that this is where we belong, this is who we are, this is now the core of our identity. Anyone in Chutz La'aretz is increasingly playing a peripheral role in Jewish history, right? Because it's like in an election campaign, you've got the core, or in a military campaign, you've got the core of what's going on, and then you've got stuff also going on the side that's also useful. Today, more and more, maybe in America is a partial exception, but the rest of the diaspora is becoming less and less core to the big Jewish future. What happens in Australia, what happens in South Africa, what happens in Britain, France, these are all important. But in the weight of what's really changing the future of the Jewish people, it's basically probably something like 60, 70% Eretz Yisrael, 20% America, or nearly 30% America, and then like kind of a few percentages everywhere else. Each percentage matters, but it's less and less impacting what's going to be.
How amazing to be part of that.
No, there's no question. We're in such a crazy generation. It's a crazy generation. You can sit and have a conversation with me here, and like 200 years ago, nobody would know who you is or who I was. Maybe the people in our village, right? We're not like top of anything. And at the end of the day, you're going to probably have how many hundred or thousand or however many people listening to this. And you can talk to the world now. You can impact the world. And here in the epicenter where it's all happening and everything is very dynamic and the tensions here, very deep tensions, that they're really the tensions of the Jewish people trying to work out who we are. Mm-hmm. That's really what it is. We're kind of reconciling ourselves after the whole modernity and all the anti-Semitism and eventually the Holocaust and this whole traumatic stuff. And now we're kind of, enough decades later, trying to work, well, who are we really? Are we the people who secularized?
Like a teenager going through a crisis, identity crisis.
We definitely are going through a collective identity crisis, pulling in lots of directions. And the long-term resolution of that is going to define Klal Yisrael. But that's defined here. Mm-hmm. What the equivalent crises in Chutz La'aretz are not as tense because they're not as central.
Right.
And so this is really where it's all going to be defined. And then the spillover from everyone having their little podcast and their things impacts the whole globe, impacts the whole world, impacts it in Ruchnius level, it impacts it in Gashmis level, and on a natural level. Yeah.
What message would you give to a family or an individual who's torn between staying in a vibrant Jewish community abroad and making the move to Israel?
I wouldn't like to give a generic message because it's so case specific. Mm-hmm. But again, there's no question. Do we want to be in the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us is where He wants us? If you're here, it's Doma Kamishesh Le'Eloka. It's like you've got a God, in a place full of Avodah Zarah. It's still like, or it's, the other Lashon is even stronger. This is the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be. I don't see it as a. I don't believe that it can't be. There's that many Jews out there seriously not thinking that way. Mm-hmm. So once you're thinking that way already, I would say the next stage is make a plan. You can't be a next year. Like a lot of areas of Avodah Hashem, it's a big one. Moving homes is a big one. Moving careers is a big one. So fine, there should be a plan. When would you like to be? 5 years, 10 years? What would it take to get here? It's like if you make a plan to finish Shas. Mm-hmm. Or you make a plan to not speaking Lashon Hara. You can't plan to do it tomorrow, maybe. Fine. But you want to plan for 2 years' time, you got to start taking steps today. So what would it take? You got to join a Daf Yomi shir. You got to join a Shmir Salosh thing. You got so start listening out. Start noticing start speaking to people who made Aliyah. Start thinking what was the process. What would it take? Do we need 3 other families to come with us? Let's have a chat with them. Right? Do we need to know which kehillah we would go to if you would hypothetically make Aliyah? Which school you send your kids to? What age is the last age you could reasonably come? Etc. Etc. People should, I think, even if they're not realistically thinking of coming the next year or two, I believe it's a basic avodah Hashem to say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I know you want me here. I would love to be here. At the moment it's too difficult, but I am speaking to people. I am paying attention. I'm thinking of how we could formulate the plan to make sure that we could be here.
I love that. Beautiful. And as you said earlier, if you can't come, encourage your children to come. Make a plan for them. Encourage them to plan their future here.
That's it. Yeah.
Finally, Rabbi Rowe, the famous closing questions I ask all my guests. Well, you've sort of answered it, but I want to hear a bit more. Where in Israel do you live, and why did you choose it?
Yerushalayim.
Lucky you.
Yeah. There's chusavul zechiyas to live here. We did think a lot about Beit Shemesh because it was so many Anglos there now. But at the end of the day, we had 2 factors. One is I'm working in Yerushalayim. That's not the biggest factor because commuting from Beit Shemesh is a shorter distance than commuting from Golders Green to the centre of London, for example. But distance in time, physical distance it might not be, but time-wise, travel it's easier. But we also were very blessed to have family here, and we felt for the kids to be around their cousins was a huge, huge advantage.
Huge.
And so far we've been able to. So far, there's rent parity in England. If you, we thank Hashem, we were able to own a property eventually in England. And if you rent something there, you can rent the equivalent here. Buying is not quite equal in Yerushalayim. We'd have to move out in Mitzvah Hashem if we get to that. So we have to see. I say have to move out.
For now you're here. This is where you landed, and it's good.
And you know what we say? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is moving everything all the time. So where we'll end up in Eretz Yisrael, who knows? It's going to stay Yerushalayim. We're going to move further out. Whatever. You're always in Eretz Yisrael. You're never far away from Yerushalayim. That's the other huge thing. You're literally a Friday afternoon drive there. Go to the coast or come back. It's so accessible.
Absolutely. And if you had to move somewhere else in the country, where would you go and why?
So again, I think for our kids, probably Bet Shemesh is probably the easiest.
Like Ramat Bet Shemesh, you mean?
Yeah, the Ramat Bet Shemesh, that's that sort of community. But we'd look around, who knows? And at different stages of life, who knows? There's
Absolutely.
Each city, each town, everything is so amazing here. It's like You try, every time we travel, we go on a lot of Tialim and things, and every time you're in a place of Tanakh, you're in a place of the Mishnah, in a place of even recent history, you're in a place where someone was Moshe Nefesh. You drive along the Yerushalayim Tel Aviv highway. First of all, you take a picture of the British Mandate era when it was a desert, and you read the Prokim in Yeshayahu about the Nevuahs that this is going to turn into a fruitful place. I mean, this is just amazing. It's happening in front of us. Then you drive along a road where you've got cars burnt out because people were Moshe Nefesh to end the siege of Yerushalayim, and they gave their lives for it. This is Jews giving their life for Klal Yisrael. This is you can't. You're everywhere you are. You're just in the most amazing place. Apart from the fact there's always fun things to do that's kosher, and there's so much from-friendly life and child-friendly life here. Everything's designed for families and children and from life and kosher. And it's amazing.
Beautiful.
And everywhere you go is just magical. Everywhere you go is amazing. You go, it's fact. Kivrei Tzadikim are like everywhere you move. Makomas Kadoshim, places you go to the sites where David HaMelech stood. I mean, talk about kids. Here's where David and Goliath fought. No, it's not like an.
Crazy.
We're in the Eir Mikaela. We're here. Here's Midbar Tzin, probably. Here's why it's probably Midbar. You just open your nach and you're driving around there. Everything is unbelievable.
That's incredible. Well, you've caught the bug. It sounds like you're in the honeymoon period, and I hope it lasts forever.
We've been loving Eretz Yisrael forever. It's not. That's what I'm saying. I never felt I was a Ben Chutz Aretz.
Oh, amazing.
We were always a Ben Eretz Yisrael.
How amazing. We lived here for 2 years. My husband was learning, and we were planning to go back, and we both fell in love and said, that's it. We can't go back. And every day, just that love deepens more and more. It's just amazing.
We're so like
we're the lucky ones.
Any of our ancestors, I'm sure if in their tefillas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the middle of Spain during the expulsion, or Poland, France, Morocco, Iraq, wherever they were crying if they could see a picture of us today. Here we are opposite the coastal, having a conversation, a free country, being able to be B'nai Torah now. So I mean, they would dance up and down and say Hallel every day to know that.
Amazing. Reminds me of a story. I actually said it in my speech to my son Yehuda on his bar mitzvah, which was in Yerushalayim on the Shabbos before Yom Yerushalayim. Miriam Peretz, who was a famous, she was candidate to be the president of Israel. She grew up in Morocco, and she said at night her father used to read her books, and the books didn't have pictures in them. But every time he said the word Yerushalayim, he would kiss his fingers into the air, and she never understood why, but she slowly learned that this place Yerushalayim has special meaning. And today she lives in Yerushalayim, and she says she just remembers the importance and the significance of Yerushalayim, of Eretz Yisrael. That's what they yearned for. When they lived in Morocco, that's what they yearned for. So, Rabbi Rowe, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your clarity, your perspective, and your depth of thought. You've helped us look at Aliyah not just as a move from one country to another, but as a halachic responsibility, a spiritual opportunity, a powerful step toward living a more connected, meaningful Jewish life. For those listening, whether Aliyah feels close, far, or just somewhere in your heart, I hope today's conversation gave you something to reflect on, and maybe even the courage to think about differently about what home really means, both physically and spiritually. If you'd like to learn more or connect with Rabbi Rowe, you can visit rabbirowe.com or find him on Instagram at Rabbi Daniel Rowe. Throughout the season, from Rabbi Yeshua Fass to Hillel Fuld, Rabbi Prozansky, and now Rabbi Rowe, a common theme has emerged. Every Jew, wherever they are in the world, needs to make a plan. Even if Aliyah can't happen in the foreseeable future, the process begins with intention, education, and serious thought. Whether that plan is for next year or 10 years from now, it's a step that should be on every Jewish heart and mind. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to release the final episode of this unique season on Making Israel Your Home, featuring a very special guest and a meaningful conversation in honor of Yom Yerushalayim. Please stay tuned. Until then, Shalom Ulehitraot.
Thank you for listening to On the House. A special thanks to Mordechai Gordon, our editor, who makes it all possible. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with family and friends. For more insights, expert guidance, and access to listings and projects across Israel, visit buyitisrael.com. That's BUIT in Israel.com. Have a question or a topic you'd like Debbie to cover? You'll find contact details in the show notes. Whether you're planning Aliyah, searching for a home or a haven, or looking to support the Israeli economy, now is the time to buy it in Israel.